Hi, the following content is for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. If you are a healthcare provider, please consult with your affiliated institution or local ethics committee for ethical guidance related to clinical practice. Thank you.
Hello, BioE 131. Welcome to Module 39, the last in the Love and Lies series. Okay, David.
Okay, we wanted to talk to you a little bit more broadly about neuroethics with some topics that are hinted about in some of the articles that you read for today, particularly in the anti-love technology. And that's really the issue about neuroenhancement, which is a big part of debates in neuroethics. There are a lot of targets for neuroenhancement.
Well, wait a minute. We lost that sentence.
And those already currently exist.
Sorry. Nope.
Wow,
this
is just really annoying.
It's frustrating, but it does not ruin the high quality of your comments. I just need to stop you every now and then. So start again about why we're talking about neuroenhancement.
Sure. Neuroenhancement's a really major issue in neuroethics. So we really wanted to cover this topic well, and it's something that's an issue both now and going forward with technological developments. So there's several different kinds of enhancements, a number of areas of enhancement. One is mood enhancement, and that already exists. We know that there are different treatments for mood disorders, for depression and so on, but there are potentials for actually, and especially in the future may even be more, of using these things not just to help address people who have mood disorders, but to actually make people, sometimes it's referred to as, quote, better than well, make people so that even normal negative affect, that's a normal part of life to sometimes have a negative affect, might be smoothed out, or people might not experience negative affect and have positive affect almost all the time as a result of the same kinds of treatments that are sometimes used for dealing with mood enhancement. Another major area is cognitive enhancement. There are lots of drugs that are used to improve both attention and memory. There's one drug that is very commonly used by Stanford students called caffeine, that comes in all kinds of different flavors, that people use as a stimulant that helps, that I believe has some evidence that it helps both attention and memory. And so caffeine is a stimulant that people commonly use. But of course, there are ADHD drugs that are used by patients who don't have ADHD. There's some stuff going on with young people using Alzheimer's drugs or Parkinson's drugs for their improvements of memory, or the potential they might do this. And there's a that we are recommending for people to watch.
Yes, we have
Stephen Colbert.
We want to give a warning. We do want to give a warning because this is not very respectful to Stanford students. We figured it's a Stephen Colbert when he used to have the show called The Colbert Report, and he did a skit on study drugs, right?
Yeah.
So if you do Colbert Report study drugs, you can hear Stanford and other things that you might hold dear being insulted by this comedian.
And believe it or not, there's, in addition to cognitive enhancement, there's also moral enhancement. It turns out there are some differences in brain patterns between people who answer trolley car questions differently. And remember,
this is like the Balmer Peak. Yeah, this is like one of our very first interactions, but there's some science behind it.
There is some science behind it. So it turns out there are differences between, so those trolley problems are things like if you have 3 people or 5 people about to be hit by a train, and the only way to stop the train and save the people is to shove somebody over the side of the rail to get in the way of the train and save people. It turns out there are differences in the brains of people who answer that question differently. And so people have been able to develop drugs to target those parts of the brain. And so they've been able to show that if you give people certain drugs, you get systematically different answers to the trolley problem. People become more deontological or more utilitarian based on these drugs that they're given, which is kind of interesting. And then while you've seen anti-love technology, there's also pro-love technology, another enhancement of increasing emotional or romantic connectedness.
I want to love you, but I don't. I have a second order desire to love you, so I'm going to take some drugs.
There we go. So anyway, so these are all different areas of enhancement. What are some of the concerns about enhancement? Well, the first one is obviously safety. And in fact, there's some nice New York Times articles about some of the things that happened to some young people who took Adderall, who didn't really have ADHD, and some of the negative consequences of doing that, including, I believe there's at least one death that they talked about in the New York Times article. So there could be challenges from a safety point of view in doing some of these things.
I don't know if this is still true, but when we used to teach this lecture live, we found an incredibly high rate of Adderall use among our student body. I don't know if that's still true.
Yeah,
and this was with non-anonymous, just raise your hand type questions.
Yeah. So, and usually these are all a function of the fact that these are almost all off-label uses. And that's actually a really important part of understanding some of the uses of these things. So we haven't really talked about this at all, but when the FDA approves a drug for a given indication, just because it's approved it for one indication, once it's approved, period. The fact that it's approved for an indication puts a limit on the ability of the company for advertising. So they can't advertise it for something other than its approved indication. But physicians can order it for anything they want to. And the only real limitation is malpractice, tort law, medical standards. So a lot of these uses of drugs that wind up happening in these enhancement areas are off-label uses, including an example I'm going to get to in just a minute.
So on-label is what the FDA approved, and off-label is all other uses. I don't want you to think that this is all doctors who are rogue and dangerous.
Sure.
We sometimes learn that a drug that was approved for some very minor illness or for some very rare illness is super useful for another illness, and we use it in all good faith with great results. And it's just that the FDA never approved it because they didn't even know it was beneficial back when they approved the drug. But so one label is totally fine.
Or nobody even bothered because it quickly went into common use. Right. That happens a lot too when it's with something that worked in one population and it got approved, and then people in other populations used it, and then it went into common usage. There was no point in going back from the company's point of view and doing an IND. Almost all pediatric drugs, because of that, vast majority of pediatric drugs are off-label. So there are off-label uses in smaller doses, usually of drugs that were approved for adults. Another issue or concern, in addition to all safety issues, is worries about the loss of meaning of achievement. What does it mean to achieve something when you are using pharmacological or other kinds of enhancement as the way of achieving it? So similarly, we see this for commodification of a related concern is around the commodification of human abilities. We saw a lot of this debate around the use of steroids and amphetamines in sports, in baseball, in cycling, where those were all examples of physical, not mental, pharmacological enhancement to improve performance. And there's worries that when you lose the meaning of achievement and lose these things, you may also have a loss of a sense of responsibility for some of those things. And those are all really, and that they take some of the meaning out of it. And then a third area of concern is the way in which these kinds of technologies, enhancement technologies, could increase inequality. So you can imagine if there are technologies that essentially make it possible to make people better, smarter, more able to do things that other people can't, If it follows the distribution of many other goods in society, it will mean people who are already more affluent and already have the benefits of more education, more money being spent on their education, and better environments, and all the good things that those environmental benefits give them. Now they'll get a pharmacological boost too. And that could make existing problematic inequalities much, much worse.
Because we've
Now,
already said that we're worried about them also getting the benefits of gene enhancement if that ever happens. And so now they're
right.
getting better genes, they're getting better drugs.
And all the other parts of the
Yeah,
environment, tutors, everything else.
justice issues everywhere.
Justice issues everywhere. But it's important to note that there are rebuttals to some of these concerns. Obviously, the safety issue has to be addressed and dealt with. But it's important to note that we enhance all the time. All of you who drink coffee enhance yourselves. Russ is right now doing probably the most important enhancement ever in human history, namely writing. Writing is a major enhancement. We can take information and you don't have to remember it because you can put it down on something else and come to it later. So written language is a major enhancement. When you come to class, watching this video is a cognitive enhancement. At least we hope that you're learning something.
Let's not push that too hard, but yeah, in the direction of enhancement.
Hopefully it's an enhancing. There are a lot of ways in which there are ways of getting coached, improve that happen now, developing techniques for learning that make it easier for people to study, being more organized. All of those are enhancement techniques. Where do we draw the line? Why is it that it's okay if we do it one way, but not okay if we use a drug? A second rebuttal is that the line between enhancement and in therapy is often a function of either time or widespread adoption. So Russ and I both are making use of another important enhancement. As is typical for people our age, we don't see things up close very well, and so we have to use these reading glasses in order to be able to see. So even though species typical functioning would be for us to just have to squint a lot and not be as good at reading as younger people, that would just be part of the thing. Old academics would have to retire because we just can't see very well anymore.
I could literally not do my job. If I take these glasses off, I cannot read, I cannot write.
Me too.
I can't even see what's on the computer right now. So it is a total enhancement.
Yep. So here's something that's typical of the species, and without it, we can't function. And yet we don't tend to think of either glasses or LASIK as enhancements anymore. We think of them as therapies because of widespread adoption, and we're used to that. Fluoride, it's natural for people to have tooth decay at very high levels, but we dump fluoride into the water supply to reduce the amount of tooth decay. And again, that winds up becoming something that we don't think of as an enhancement. So today's enhancement is tomorrow's treatment if it goes into widespread adoption. And then lastly, to address the justice argument, and there's some very interesting literature on this actually, the justice argument really doesn't show that we shouldn't be using these enhancements. What it shows is we should be doing more of it, and that we should be particularly targeting enhancements at underserved communities where it might actually help to make up for existing inequalities. So obviously it would be better if we made up for those inequalities and had a less unjust society, but maybe we could use some of these kinds of technologies to help address some of those things and make those things available. And there was a Target article in the American Journal of Bioethics a few years ago about the idea of using these technologies for that purpose. We are getting close to the end. I'm getting paged, so I've got a consult I'm going to have to respond to in just a minute, but I think I can go just 2 or 3 more minutes, which I think all we have to do. I want to give one last case study to sort of illustrate some of these concepts. There's a drug called propranolol. It's a beta blocker that's commonly used for heart disease. Very common off-label use for propranolol is stage fright. So people often use this for stage fright. There's a lot of interesting research that's been done on using propranolol to help treat PTSD. It's known that if at the time, so basically when you have a traumatic experience, a lot of adrenaline goes through your body and through your brain, and it winds up leading to encoding those memories in a more vivid fashion that's thought to contribute to PTSD. And so if right after a traumatic event you take propranolol, you don't have that same encoding take place. And of course, you'd have to know enough to take it right afterwards. But there's also some research. What people are doing is they're intentionally seeing things to trigger the PTSD and then taking propranolol to see if that makes it go away. And there's some evidence that that can be at least somewhat beneficial. So what about off-label uses of propranolol to get rid of bad memories that could potentially trigger PTSD, or it could get used much more widely off-label for other kinds of things? Like if you ever had that experience where you did something stupid that is a bad enough experience that it's encoded in that way, that there's something that you think about, and every time you think about it, it's like, oh, you can't even look at it in your brain. It's like, oh, I can't believe I did that. Oh, I can't believe that happened. Oh, I made such a fool of myself. I can't believe it. It's so painful to even think about it. Your heart starts racing, and you wind up having the same kind of adrenaline rush every time you think of certain memories. And we've all had different things that produce those experiences, things that really make us upset or are hard to deal with, things that are painful, all those kinds of experiences. Well, have those painful experiences. You're like, oh my God, I made a fool of myself when I was drunk. How am I going to show my face on Monday? I know, I'll pop a propranolol, and that'll make it all better. Maybe we could get rid of the painful experiences of breakups. Maybe we could get rid of all kinds of things that are very painful in our lives through the use of propranolol to help smooth out some of those things that are where we would normally have adrenaline-based encoding. So what are some concerns about this? This has been a hot topic in the literature about propranolol and these uses. I actually did a 60-minute show about this. So how important are those experiences for development of who you are and moral development? If this went into really widespread use, would that be dangerous? What would the implications of that be? Would people become more sociopathic? So on the one hand, we want to save its good use for PTSD and maybe other good uses. We don't want it to be used in ways that lead it to being abused for all of these different kinds of cases. And so then the question becomes, how do we make sure that this is going to be implemented in such a way that we can take advantage of its potentially good uses to help people cope better with debilitating problems while avoiding the potential that this might wind up leading to unintended consequences in terms of people being, just not the kind of people that we want them to be because they've smoothed out all of their experiences this way. And that's it.
Thank you for coming to this module. We'll see you in class.